If I had to recommend a printer for a new maker, would I recommend the P1S? Absolutely, but with some caveats. Hi, my name is Sarah, and I am the crazy crafty maker behind this channel, LoudCraft Studio, and welcome. I wanted to do a review of the 3D printers that I worked with this past year since getting started. So if you don't know what 3D printing is actually a technology that's been around since the 1980s, but has become more accessible for makers and crafters alike over the past 20 years or so. These devices are pretty cool. They enable you to print 3D models using various types of filament or resin, and can create anything from finely detailed miniatures to larger, more functional prints, to really even things like artwork. You could print the moon if you wanted. No, literally, I printed the moon. Totally worth the 23-hour print job. Anyway, so I got interested in 3D printing around the same time that I was starting to learn to laser cut and was just opening my shop. I think I was interested in looking at which mediums would work better for some of the things when I was first playing around with jewelry and possibly being able to 3D print portions of my jewelry, which might work better than doing it on the laser cutter. And that kind of prompted me to getting into this field and doing some research. So that's what got me started with it. I chose to do filament printing versus resin printing, partly because of the interests of safety and fumes. That's not to say you're not going to get some off-gassing with filament, but it's significantly better than when you're dealing with resin printing. This was something my husband was very much advocating for when I expressed interest in initially 3D printing. He was like, if you're going to do this, you definitely need to do this, filament printing. So that's kind of what led me into that direction. And honestly, I love printing in filament. I occasionally look over at resin printers because you've got like this finer detail that you can get with them. But at this point, I really want to stay over in filament land. Now, I will say, just like with a laser cutter, there is going to be a learning curve with 3D printing. You kind of need to understand how the machine works, how filament printing in general works. That way, you can definitely troubleshoot when things go wrong, and you can optimize your prints so that you get, the best quality possible and you don't run into any issues. To give you a very quick overview, filament printing involves loading a filament, like this one. They're most commonly made of things like PLA or PETG that is then fed into the machine, melted down, and squeezed through a nozzle, and essentially applied in layers that stack up and create whatever shape you want. These prints are usually designed in 3D modeling software or CAD software, things like Blender, Autodesk, Fusion 360, Tinkercad is a very popular one online. Shaper 3D, which is available for multiple platforms, is one of my favorites to work with as well. Once you have that model, you usually load it into a slicer program. This is a program that cuts the model into these thin little slices based on the machine's settings and preferences. That information then gets translated into what's called G-code, and it's sent over to your machine. G-code is basically telling the machine what temperature it should be, how much it should be extruding, and where it should be moving in space. If you've ever frosted a cupcake with a frosting bag, it's very similar to that. A 3D filament printer is essentially frosting a cupcake, only using plastic and doing a way more detailed icing job. Now I want cupcakes. That's just kind of a quick rundown of how filament printing works. So most of the time I am designing and printing small things that I want to sell in my shop, or I'm doing more filament printings using a software called Hueforge. Now, I'm not going to get into how to do Hueforge paintings today, but it is on my to-do list for tutorials. But again, I've been kind of experimenting with doing smaller things like, eventually probably, some straw tips for, the classic tumblers that are in season. Or I also have been, doing things like jewelry, making cool signs. I do things like that. I do sort of a combination of practical accessory meets cute design. I don't do a ton of functional printing in that I need things to be, really sturdy and durable, but I do that from time to time. For instance, if you've seen my videos from my Cricut, I actually have an extender that I printed out to hold the mat because of the location of where my Cricut is in space. The mat just kind of sort of gets suspended. This would be an example of a functional print, a print that's designed to serve a purpose, and it does a pretty good job. It was a great little find. I will leave the link in the description from the print. I found it on Thingiverse. It's an easy download and print. If you're curious, I think I actually printed that one in a pearlescent filament. It's a very pretty filament. Kind of gives you a transparent pearlescent finish. Why did I use it for that one? Why not? Make it pretty. So that's the sort of things I'm using my 3D printer for. And I just wanted to be upfront with that so that I can give you a better idea of where this review is coming from. I'm not necessarily making things to be super, super sturdy or such. I'm more interested in efficiency, speed, design, as well as ease of use. That being said, let me talk about the machines that I'm using. I actually started with this machine right here. The Ender 3 V2 Neo. Now, why did I go with this machine? Well, for one thing, price point. The Ender 3 is a very inexpensive model, and it's often recommended as a good beginner model. I have some thoughts on that. Now, I went with the V2 Neo because it required the least amount of assembly. Which I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of assembly even for this model. It took me over an hour to put this together, and I was following a YouTube video tutorial the whole time. Now, I'm one of those weird people that likes to put together IKEA furniture and, handles their little pictographic representations, instructions, easy, no problem. So when I say putting this together was hard, it was hard. So I started with the Ender 3 to sort of dip my toes into this medium, figure out, do I like this, how I do certain things, work out some kinks, how you make your first prints. And I would say it's an okay model for that. It definitely gave me a chance to play with it and be like, oh yeah, I really like doing this. But there were definitely some frustrations with the Ender 3 that drove me absolutely insane. And I honestly didn't have to deal with them when I upgraded to the Bambu P1S model. BambuLabs is a manufacturer of 3D printers that has become very popular, partly because they have taken the design of a 3D printer and stepped up the game. A few years ago, they released the Bambu X1 Carbon, which is their flagship machine. The printer is completely contained, which helps not only manage the temperature of the filament better, but also helps control any of the off-gassing and fumes, which you might get with some of the more exotic filaments like EBS, which is a very sturdy filament, but it can give off some really toxic fumes. So they actually have a HEPA filter built into their system for that. They then added a budget model, which is called the P1P, and what they did was actually strip the encasing off the X1C and took out some of the more advanced features. One of them being the camera with LiDAR detection that is able to see if something was going wrong with the print while it was printing, and being able to analyze the first layer of the print to make sure that it actually adhered properly and there didn't seem to be any errors, which is an important step in 3D printing that you learn very early on. You don't get a good bed adhesion, you're screwed. So last summer, which was around the time that I decided that I really did like doing this 3D printing, I was kind of frustrated with the limitations of the Ender 3, so I was looking for an alternative. The things that really frustrated me, admittedly, are things that are, common issues with 3D printing, including things like bed leveling and printing speed. I also wondered if there were more nuanced things I could do, such as printing in multiple colors. Now, you can change filament colors by inserting a pause into the G code that says, I want you to pause here so that I can, change the filament out and, put in a different color. That way you could do multicolor prints, but it was going to be limited by layer. So I was looking around, seeing what other options there were, and I stumbled onto Bambu's new release for that summer. the P1S. So the P1S was sort of the in-between answer to the P1P and the Carbon X1C. The P1S has some improvements over the P1P, namely that it is encased, but it didn't contain the LiDAR detection that is built into the Carbon X1C camera. It also had a similar easy setup and auto leveling features that are built into all of these devices. What was even greater about the release was that they actually priced the P1S at the price of the previous P1P and then lowered the P1P's price. The P1S, when I purchased it, was $699, and then you could also attach an automated material system, get as a combo for $949. The AMS can also be purchased separately for $349. In fact, you can actually attach 4 of these automated material systems to the machine using a hub. That way, in a single print, you can actually manage 16 different colors. Possibly even more if you're willing to swap out a filament mid-print. I purchased the machine combo with the automated material system. To say that I was blown away would be an understatement. So the first thing I noticed with this machine compared to the Ender 3 was how ridiculously easy it was to use. The Bambu P1S has a different design, and rather than the filament extruder moving up and down, the base plate is actually what is moving up and down for your Z-axis. This enables it to be a little sturdier, and the P1S is also able to self-level. And it self-levels really well. The Ender 3 sort of had a self-leveling system built in where you could do, the multiple touch taps onto your base plate and try and accommodate for that. But even still, you have to do manual adjustments in the beginning and try and get it dialed in. And that's not to say that sometimes, you don't need to necessarily, maybe dial in settings with the Bambu, but honestly, the self-leveling worked straight out of the box, and it was a welcome change. The BambuLabs software, which comes with the machine, well, you download it. It is 2024. When was the last time any machine came with a disc of hardware? The entire interface is actually pretty easy to use, whereas with the Ender 3, there wasn't one specific. You could use various different options out there. I was using Cura, which is an open source one that is very robust, and it does a good job, but I felt like BambuLabs interface was a little more intuitive. On top of that, I now had access to an automated material system. Now again, this is optional, but I will say it is totally worth it. I asked for a second one for my birthday because I wanted to be able to manage 8 colors. Like I said, you can go up to 16, but at this point, I'm good with 8. I don't even actually get an itch for the third AMS at this point. Like I'm good. 8, 8's good for me. I've honestly only done one 8-color print, and that was the Lapcraft Studio sign that I did in my recent video blog. This is the first time that I actually printed with a total of 8 colors. I think I've done up to 7 before, and I'm honestly really happy with how this turned out. Also, one of the really neat things about BambuLabs system with the AMS is that you can actually use their software to color their prints. So you start off with one filament and then can actually use a paint bucket tool or even a brush to color other portions of the print and tell it that you want to use a different filament for that. And that's how you can get these really intricate, beautiful multicolored prints. So there are other ways to do multi-filament painting, usually, like I said earlier, by doing it in layers. And that's actually how the Hueforge system works. And these create these beautiful filament paintings. It bases it a little bit on the transmission distance of the filament. That's how much light and how transparent filaments are. But that is a video for another time. When I get a chance to do that, I will include a link. The only downside, of course, of doing multi-filament printing is that you really need to dial in your purge settings, because anytime you change a filament color, it's got to clear out the leftover filament that's in the extruder. That way it's clean and, you have a new color and it's not, mixed with the previous one. Think transitioning from black to white. You got to clear out all the black of the extruder before going to white. Otherwise, you're going to end up with gray. Now, the initial settings out of the box definitely over extrude way more than you need. So it takes a little bit of figuring out to adjust how much purge goes on in between filaments. And this really is mostly to just try and minimize waste. I've said before that, I'm an eco-conscious person and I try to minimize waste. And this is definitely an area where that's important to me. And of course, it wouldn't be a P1S review if I didn't talk about how the machine has a specifically dedicated area in the back that does all of its purging, complete with a chute that dumps out all of the filament. Others affectionately refer to this as the poop chute. I think it's a great design, other than the fact that they don't really provide you with a way to catch the poop. So if you get one of these machines, I guarantee you that one of the first things you're going to end up printing is a functional print that acts as a poop collector. And yes, I did mine in a Galaxy Gold filament. You know, if you're not a huge fan of a certain filament and you're just making like, you know, a poop chute, why not just use that up? I ain't gonna waste my pretty glow-in-the-dark filament for that. Although that would be entertaining, glow-in-the-dark poop chute. Boy, the things you come up with when you're, you know, half asleep and recording a YouTube video. So one of the other things that I really like about this machine is how much faster it is. The amount of time that it would take for me to print something on the Ender 3 is cut in half, if not by a third. In fact, the Bambu 3 actually has a couple different settings. Standard, silent, which is when it's like printing a little bit slower, so the machine is a little bit quieter. And then it also has the ability to print in what it calls sport mode, which is printing 125% of what you put in, and a speed called ludicrous, where it's printing at 150% of what you tell it to. Now, while this can be cool and it can work in some cases, most of the time you're still just going to want to leave it on standard mode. Like, you get your settings dialed in, you want a good quality print, and if you increase the speed, you may end up losing that quality or possibly even deal with some adhesions and extruding problems. That being said, the standard mode on the Bambu P1S is pretty fast. On top of that, some additional things I also liked about the P1S is it's definitely well built. It's got this sturdy frame. Maintenance is fairly standard, like any other 3D printer. You know, you always make sure the belts are tight and everything's lubricated. And I actually haven't had any problems with the P1S in that regards. The biggest thing that I've had to worry about is making sure that the nozzle is clean. And I did actually just recently replace it, because I ended up finding a lot of crud that had built up underneath the insulation. I don't know if some of that was oozing issues that I was having when I was trying to dial in my PETG settings correctly, and I ended up just creating quite a mess. But at the same time, nozzles, you know, wear and tear over time, and that's one of those things that does eventually have to be replaced. To be honest, I've only had to replace the nozzle on my P1S once since I started using it. It's printed many more times than my Ender has. Yet I know I had to replace the nozzle on my Ender 3 like 3 more times, partly because of just things getting clogged up and not being able to get them clean. So, you know, so far things seem to be working a little bit better with the P1S. I should probably note, in terms of changing the nozzle on the P1S, I also felt like this was a lot easier and safer to do. When I had to change the nozzle on the Ender 3, you actually have to like heat the extruder up in order to unscrew the nozzle. Otherwise, you run the risk of material leaking if it's not set, if you don't do that. And that really kind of creates a burn risk, and it's difficult to do with, you know, insulated gloves. Whereas with the P1S, basically you change the nozzle by shutting the machine off, and you can do it 2 ways. You have the ability to just actually purchase the nozzle head and, you know, connect it using thermal paste. But honestly, for the price of changing out the nozzle head and the convenience, just buying a complete set to me was worth it. The P1S also comes with an excellent textured plate for popping your prints off. And this works really well out of the box too. Obviously, over time, you're going to lose a little bit of adhesion, you know, grease things build up, and it's important to keep this clean. And the company actually just recommends using Dawn and like a scrub brush to remove all of it. Some users recommend also using, you know, alcohol to wipe and really get the mat clean, and that works pretty well. But even without all of doing that, I was still having some issues with adherence despite cleaning it multiple times. And I had been using a glue stick that they had provided, you know, to get things adhered pretty well. But I don't know if I just couldn't get a thin enough layer, because I would end up with like, you know, uneven prints on the bottom, and it was just driving me crazy. And after looking around online, I found that somebody actually suggested hairspray. Specifically, they recommended the Garnier Fructis Full Control hairspray because it had a good hold, and when you heat it up, it smells kind of fruity. I mean, take your victories where you got them. Let me tell you, hairspray on a textured plate, absolute game changer. Oh my God. Best tip ever. Also, and this just might be me, but the extruder head in the P1S kind of reminds me of GlaDOS from Portal. I don't know why, but it just kind of makes me smile, especially because at the very end of the print, she it likes to really quickly re-zero itself, and to re-zero itself, it comes all the way up to the door, just kind of looms there for a moment, and it's like she's looking out and kind of surveying before going back into her little cubby hole. I don't know why, but it makes me smile. Now, certainly there are cons to this machine. Obviously, you've got the excess filament when you're changing colors, and that can be quite a bit if you don't dial in the settings and try to optimize the printing. I've actually seen where people have printed things and the amount of filament extruded for purging can actually be higher than what's used in the model. And that's definitely something that you need to try and optimize. On the bright side, when you're processing and slicing the print in BambuLabs, it will actually tell you how much filament it's going to use and how much is going to be extruded. So you can try and adjust and change things as needed. Of course, I'm also one of those people that actually collects her filament, separates it, and then sends it out to recycling. But if there is always an option to try and reduce before you get to recycling, you should do that. Another thing that may bother some of the people is the fact that the Bambu Studio is a cloud-based printing system. So you can connect it to your computer and then transmit the print wirelessly using their cloud software, which to me honestly was a big upgrade because with the Ender 3, you had to take out the micro SD card. I had to go find my little attachment, plug it into the computer, load it, and eject it, walk it back over to the machine, put it in, load it, and then run the print. I mean, yes, I know there are some Raspberry Pi options available that you can build for the Ender 3 and create sort of, a wireless setup, but this is an additional step, and honestly, it's nice to just be able to print wirelessly right out of the box. Again, it's 2024. Obviously, with a cloud-based connection, you should always, worry about security, and that can bother some people, especially because BambuLabs is a Chinese company. In my house, with the engineering government contractor husband, I actually have a dedicated network that's got some added security that isn't, I guess, connected to other things, and I was told put the printer on that network, so that's what I did, and I mean, it connects to the internet sufficiently. I'm not having any problem. Oh no, it's outside of my scope. A couple of other nuances come with the machine. The machine does come with a camera built in, so you can actually see what's printing. It doesn't look out or anything. It's, projected into the corner, and it's not as good a quality camera on the P1S as it is on the X1 Carbon, but that's okay. Ultimately, the camera is really there just to keep an eye on things and, make sure you can see if something is going haywire. I definitely like the fact that I have the option to pull that camera imaging up on my phone. That way, if I'm at work or I'm not in the area where the printer is, I can take a look and make sure everything's going okay. And if something is not going okay, the print's popped off and I've got a spaghetti mess, which has really only happened maybe even once or twice, I can hit the stop button and it will stop printing directly from my phone. Like, I don't have to run to the machine to do that. Now, it does actually do time recordings with this, and it sort of compresses them down into sort of a rapid print. So it's not like you're going to get a 23-hour video. You're going to get one that's, maybe 15 seconds at max. Another con to consider with this machine, obviously, is price. It's definitely more expensive than the Ender 3. I do think, however, you're paying for what you get in this situation, and the upgrades that you get with this machine, in my opinion, are definitely worth the price, especially given the fact that they came out with the P1S and put it at the price of the previous P1P and then dropped the P1P. So if the P1S, is a little bit out of your price range, you could still get the P1P. I mean, the biggest difference, I think, are the fact that, you don't have the built-in, containment unit, which they actually provide the files for if you wanted to print them yourself. In fact, there's a really cool companion cube model that I was honestly a little disappointed that I couldn't put on my P1S, but I digress. So, I mean, this, allows for a more affordable option for certain users. And then obviously you don't have to get the automated material system. I mean, you can literally just print the P1S, one filament at a time. That being said, I definitely think it's worth the addition. And I asked for a second one for my birthday because after having one, I was like, this is awesome and I need a second one. Of course, some people do report issues with tech support, being slow to respond, and, perhaps having issues with software and hardware. You're going to get that with, pretty much any machine on the market. Heck, you're going to get that with pretty much any computer on the market. And, every machine's going to have its problems. I have been fortunate in that I have not had any problems like that other than needing to change out the nozzle head because, again, it got really messed up and cruddy. And part of that, wear and tear, and part of it was because I think I was having problems with my PETG settings. So if you're a new maker and want to look into 3D printing, do I recommend the Bambu P1S? I absolutely recommend this machine. This machine is awesome. But I want to stress the caveat that if you're starting completely from scratch and just want to dip your toes in the water, make sure this is something really is for you, then you honestly might want to consider getting a less expensive machine to play around with initially. Just to make sure you like doing it and you're learning the general basics of, how filament printing works. There is a lot to this. The design process itself has to be designed with filament printing in mind, knowing its limitations. Then there's also knowing how the machine works, knowing the importance of leveling and making sure you've got great bed adhesion, knowing what filaments you like to play with. And it might be worth doing some of this exploration on a less expensive machine so that if you accidentally break something, you're not breaking a more expensive device. An alternative might actually be seeing if you've got a local maker lab or perhaps if your local library has a 3D printer that you can kind of get to know and interact with. That might be a good start as well. I do know that Bambu released a smaller machine this end of the past year, the A1 Mini, which is a smaller, more introductory printer. I've not had any experience with that, but from the sounds of it, it's got some of the bells and whistles that you get with the Bambu P1S, but on a smaller, more introductory machine. So you might consider that. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on 3D printing with the Bambu P1S and, just sort of a brief overview of my journey. I hope this has been helpful. I plan on doing a tutorial here in the next week or two where I will be designing a 3D print to give you guys kind of an insight into my design process and how I do 3D printing. I'm somewhat of a self-taught designer. I have, some experience from school. Not everything I do is to gospel, if you will. So, I hope that video will be helpful for you guys in the future. If you like more of this content and want to see more of it, hit the like button and the subscribe and ring that bell if you want to get notified for when I drop new videos. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.